all this fancy work around AI starts flowing into the agency and applications, they're going to need to be able to do the review process of that, and that's costly, and it's requires a lot of training and expertise, and I am worried about that.
Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of FDA Watch. I'm Wayne Pines. I've been involved with FDA for several decades. I was formerly an associate commissioner of the agency, and I've authored or edited 16 books about the agency.
And I'm Shelly Garg, and I'm the managing partner and founder of Garg Law, a full-service FDA-focused law firm. I have been on the private side advising companies on regulatory compliance and enforcement for the last 15 years.
Shelly and I are very excited about this particular episode. It's the first part of the inaugural FDA Watch multi-episode series. This is going to be a 3-part series called AI, Medical Products, and FDA. We're excited to be producing it in collaboration with Arnold Porter, very distinguished and well-respected and long-standing law firm. It's been known to stay on top of the science and technology on behalf of its clients for many decades. I've worked with Arnold Porter lawyers for a long time, and they're always top-notch, and I just don't say that because they're on this series. This series begins with an overview of AI in the life sciences space, and will be followed by part 2 of the series later this month, which will focus on AI and discovery, design, and development. Then we'll conclude in early May with part 3, where we'll be discussing AI and drug and device commercialization. Let's start by saying what's obvious. You can't really have a policy discussion in any industry these days without talking about AI and the enormous potential impact specifically on FDA, on FDA's activities, on the regulation of drugs and devices and all products. AI is one of the top priorities of FDA. The former commissioner mentioned it in all of his closing remarks, that is one of the larger issues that FDA needs to address, and I believe that the present administration agrees with that. Fortunately, as a result of our partnership with Arnold Porter, we're bringing you an amazing array of experts that you'll hear from in all 3 parts of these series to guide us on this journey. So let's start by meeting the guests. Our first guest is Dan Kracov. Dan is a partner at Arnold Porter. He's the chair of the firm's Global Life Sciences Industry Group. I've personally known and worked with Dan for several decades. He's widely known as one of the foremost FDA lawyers in the country. His expertise has been widely recognized. Most recently, Dan received the Food and Drug Law Institute Distinguished Service and Leadership Award. First, I want to thank you, Dan, for spearheading Arnold Porter's involvement in this series, and welcome to FDA Watch.
Thanks, Wayne.
Also joining us today is Abeba Habtemariam. Abeba is a partner at Arnold Porter. She advises life sciences companies on a range of regulatory compliance and legislative matters, with a particular focus on counseling pharmaceutical and medical device manufacturers on compliance with the Federal Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act. She advises clients on the regulation of medical device software and healthcare IT, pre-market approval and clearance strategies, promotional review matters, and CGMP compliance. Welcome to FDA Watch, Abeba.
Thanks, Shelly.
Now let's welcome Ethan Dabbs. Ethan is managing director and senior partner at the Boston Consulting Group, where he heads biopharma work in North America. He also serves as the firm's Northeast System lead. He's an expert in biopharma strategy and operations, commercialization, market access and pricing, clinical operations, medical affairs, and field-based medicine. Welcome to FDA Watch, Ethan.
Thanks, Wayne. It's great to be here.
And also joining us today is Lauren Silvis. Lauren serves as Senior Vice President of External Affairs at Tempus. She oversees regulatory, public policy, government affairs, and strategic communications. She has served as Senior Advisor at the Department of Health and Human Services, Chief of Staff at the FDA, and Deputy Center Director for Policy in the FDA Center for Devices and Radiological Health. Welcome to FDA Watch, Lauren.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Throughout this podcast, we're going to be asking questions for the entire panel, but the first question is just for Dan. Dan, Arnold Porter conducted a life sciences industry survey on AI adoption late last year. Can you tell us what the key findings were?
Sure. I'll tell you a little bit about the survey first. This was conducted late last year, and we surveyed about 100 senior executives and department heads across the life sciences industry, not just in the United States, but globally. These are people who have responsibility for digital aspects of the business, everything from legal counsel, quality assurance, regulatory affairs, compliance, et cetera. And they all support decision-making around the adoption of AI within their companies. It's a little, we are now in April of 2025, so we're a few months ahead of the survey now. So I'll give you a sense of the snapshot that we took late last year, but I would, caution that this is a very fast-moving area, so we're likely to see even higher rates of adoption, certainly than what we saw even just a few months ago. A couple observations from our survey. First, there is obviously an enormous amount of activity going on in terms of AI implementation in the industry, but we're still in the very early stages. A lot of companies are experimenting. About 3/4 of the companies that we surveyed are experimenting actively with AI across the product lifecycle. Although I would say that the vast majority of that work to date, about 79% of the respondents, are using AI in R&D. Some are looking into manufacturing AI tools, marketing, regulatory, and compliance functions, but R&D is really where the discovery and development is really where the action is right now. There were quite a few concerns expressed in the survey about this journey that companies are going through in terms of risks that they're dealing with. And the highest risk that we saw was intellectual property. It was a significant concern for virtually all of the respondents in the survey. And they're concerned about facing IP-related issues, with a nexus to AI and just within the coming year. This is an area that they're quite concerned about and sort of an early challenge that they see in the adoption of AI. It's interesting, about half the respondents said that they're leveraging AI to optimize discovery and design, viewing it as improved efficiency, faster time to market for products, and 63% are using or planning to use AI-driven testing and simulations, which could also really accelerate the development of products. We're seeing a little bit of experimentation around marketing and sales strategies, but if you dig down into that, we found that it was really totally about internal experimentation and consideration, less so deployment of those types of tools. So R&D and discovery is really where it's at. And finally, right now, we're seeing a lag. And I would say that this is the area where we've probably seen a lot of catch up in the last few months, is governance. A lot of companies were experimenting with these AI tools before they had any sort of governance framework in place. Some had governance committees and were starting to think about policies and SOPs. Very few had conducted AI audits or really assembled really cross-functional teams to deal with AI. But that was about half the respondents. I wouldn't be surprised if that's 75 or 80% now, just in terms of the number of clients who are coming to us these days with needing help to put that framework in place.
That's a great summary. We're going to put a link in the show notes that will enable all of our subscribers to access the survey. That's fdawatch.net. We're going to put a link in the show notes so that you'll be able to access it. Let me turn to the other panelists here, Abeba, Ethan, and Lauren. Are the results of the survey consistent with what you're seeing from industry? Let me start with Abeba.
So I had the privilege of contributing to the survey, and I agree with the results and the report and readout. So I also am seeing that many companies are using AI in R&D in particular, and also more and more in clinical trial development. And and also hearing from a number of companies concerns about some of the uncertainties regarding the evolving legal and regulatory framework and whether FDA or other requirements might apply to uses of AI that are being contemplated by the business.
Lauren, let me ask you the same question. You heard what Dan said. Is that consistent with what you're seeing?
We certainly use and develop AI across many areas of Tempus. Using it internally, working with partners to develop it. So I think what I glean from Dan is, huge interest. Many different parts of these entities are looking at it, trying to figure out how to make the most use of it. Yes, I'd agree. R&D is probably most far along in terms of incorporating it into their day-to-day work, and a lot of what we are doing is partnerships with pharma and biotech companies in order to help them, use AI for drug development, clinical trial stratification, those kinds of projects. So pretty consistent with what we're seeing. But I think, like Dan was foreshadowing, that many other parts of the industry will be quickly incorporating it.
Ethan, your views, Boston Consulting Group?
Yeah, I would agree with the findings. I had the pleasure of getting to see some of the findings early and participate in a number of discussions around those, a few months back. I would say maybe a couple things have changed. I think I've seen our clients move more from experimentation with use cases to, I think, greater scale up of these, of AI within certain parts of their business. Certainly within development, I'm seeing with our clients much more use within the marketing and sales side to really, help them prioritize where they're directing time and activity. So I think I would just say that it has likely increased, and the scale with which this is being used within organizations has gone from experimental pilots and use cases to broader scale deployment.
Thanks, Ethan. Now, questions for the entire panel, and anyone can jump in and respond. We want this to be a real conversation. The first two related questions for all of you are, where are companies having early successes in AI adoption in drug and device development? And what are some of the problems and challenges that you see in adoption of AI during development?
I can start with this one.
Sure, please.
So I will comment first from a medical device perspective. As you might know, in terms of early successes, as you might know, FDA maintains a list on its website of medical devices that incorporate AI or machine learning, in that the FDA has authorized for marketing. And last I checked, which admittedly was this morning, there are over 1,000 devices on that list. And they span therapeutic areas, but the majority are in radiology. That's one of the areas where, at least on the device side, we really have seen the life sciences industry adopt the use of AI. And the uses vary. So it can be anything from having AI review an image from an MRI or ultrasound or CAT scan and assess for suspicious areas that might be lesions or fractures or other abnormalities, or using AI to review an image to assist a surgeon with pre-surgical planning. So really a variety of different uses. And we're also seeing more and more companies that are developing AI-based tools that are intended to identify patients that either have a condition or at risk for developing a condition. And many times these tools are using inputs from patient history, imaging, lab results, other parameters. To give a relatively recent example, I think a year or so ago, FDA authorized software that uses AI to identify patients that are at risk of developing sepsis. And given how quickly sepsis can progress, something like that can potentially be life-saving.
Thanks, Abeba. Dan, Lauren, Ethan, please feel free to jump in.
Sure. I think about, AI, the way we use it in 4 buckets. First, we're using it internally to make ourselves more efficient and to, do our jobs better. And that's, helped us, not just perform our own jobs, but also like think about how we can work with our customers and other partners. So I've found that part to be really helpful. professionally. I mentioned the AI in drug development and clinical trials. That's really having successful adoption, I think, across the industry, both in terms of optimizing clinical trial success, refining biomarker selection. There's a lot of good data and good examples and case studies out there and use cases that partners are interested in exploring. Abeba touched on the AI-based devices. We're certainly incorporating AI both in our genomic sequencing to develop algorithms to help patients and their doctors make better treatment decisions or see what additional testing they may benefit from. And then software as a medical device, where we're having standalone algorithms that would go through the FDA process for clearance or approval. And then I want to talk a little bit about just AI within the healthcare system, some of the solutions that we're offering to providers today to help them. We have care gap solutions where we can help identify patients based on their clinical profile that may benefit from additional testing or may meet guidelines for treatment, and sort of, being able to search more quickly and efficiently through all the data that's in the healthcare system to develop valuable insights to provider partners is another way where we're seeing some really successful stories where patients, may have been missed in the system, and we can identify a care gap and, flag that they may benefit from additional testing or treatment. And so those are the four ways I think about it every day, and sort of, trying to move forward on all four.
Yeah, I would add, I think a lot of the progress, a lot of the excitement is also at the stage of development that we don't necessarily get as much insight into as people who focus on regulation, because it's the least regulated part. It's discovery. It's testing products very early on to see if they have promise. These in silico models and so forth, and organ models that companies are using and so forth. As in other areas like computational biology, there's mixed success there, but I think that's going to be huge in the future. It's already, I think, likely producing from some very significant leaps. And it's the least regulated part, so companies have more flexibility, although they are going to be responsible for explaining to FDA exactly what they did. So they're also sort of thinking about how are we going to achieve that over time. But that's a very important area for AI implementation.
I would agree with what's been said to date. I come at it from the lens of, how are we helping our clients think about opportunities to identify sources of competitive advantage, and I think AI is a tremendous opportunity for that. We see it as has been mentioned already in drug discovery and development, just accelerating rapidly. Like we're seeing like 1,000 times faster development of computational models, using these technologies to really discover and design, a mix of both small molecules and large complex biologics. Precision medicine is another area that I think we're seeing, contributions from generative AI by identifying and developing therapies that are tailored to individual patients. We're also seeing it in, trial design, site selection, patient finding, again, ways that clients are trying to seek sources of advantage to accelerate, their lead in developing a product relative to competitors. We also see it in the supply chain, companies monitoring, using AI to monitor supply chains and optimize, production, manufacturing efficiency. And then, as I mentioned, I'm seeing it more and more on the commercialization side and the customer engagement side. How do you personalize interactions? How do you personalize content generation, which gets to a whole bunch of regulatory challenges that I think we're probably going to talk about soon? How do we provide even deeper customer support? So lots of applications across the whole supply chain, but largely focused for my clients on sources of competitive advantage.
Yeah, just let me follow up with a different kind of question. Ethan, start with you, and then the other panelists. What sort of governance and compliance bodies and mechanisms are companies adopting to address AI risks?
I mean, this is a board level issue for most of my clients. It's discussed at the executive leadership team levels and at the board. And, I think it started out with responsible AI policies, but we've done a lot of work to help our clients educate their boards on where some of the opportunities are, but certainly where some of the challenges and regulatory hurdles are. So again, for our clients, it's largely a board level topic, and some of that policy is being set there.
Yeah, Lauren.
Yeah, I think probably, if you're in a consulting or law firm position, you have a better sense of what's going on across the board. We have AI governance. We have a committee. It's very serious people who stay abreast of developments and, advise. And, for developing AI, we can look and see what, the advice is or what the rules are. So I think it's for those who are more seeing a spectrum of clients, probably have more insight into, what's going on in the broader range.
Yeah, I'll just add that, we are certainly seeing governance committees and boards, board involvement. We're seeing policies and SOPs being developed. I think what I see companies struggling with is the training and education component internally as well, in terms of people understanding what are the risks here even, and how are we going to cabin in those risks with AI, particularly generative AI tools, right? So it's... But I think that's an issue that's really across the board in the industry right now, from those things that are software as a medical device to the implementation internally, is how do you ring fence this in a way that limits your potential liability, but yet still get the potential benefit from the use of AI in the given application. So I think that's where we are right now, is companies trying to really think about risk management as well.
Thanks, Dan. Now moving on to global and national AI policy issues, where we have already seen two key developments, the revocation of Biden Executive Order 14110 and the very early policy changes instituted by the Trump administration. In his first week, President Trump signed a broad executive order calling for agencies to revoke AI policies, quote, that act as a barrier to American AI innovation. How has that manifested in policy so far? Abeba, maybe we can start with you.
I don't think we've seen too much in the way of changes to FDA's AI specific policies as of yet, although I'm sure there will be significant changes in the future, including potentially as part of the administration's sort of broader deregulatory efforts that are ongoing. Yep. I think it's possible FDA will repeal or relax regulations for certain types of AI-based devices, such as down classifying some of them. But what might be more likely, at least in the short term, is for FDA to exercise increased enforcement discretion for AI-based technologies and to take less enforcement action in that area.
Thanks, Abeba. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I was going to say, it is early days yet, and we're clearly in a not just deregulatory, but the AI policy in this administration is being postured as sort of free speech related as well. So it's a very interesting dynamic that's going on right now. So I would expect we're going to be seeing some significant liberalization of the positions that FDA had. Probably the most important may be in clinical decision support tools, which I'm sure we'll be talking about along the way here, because I think that's an area that progress in terms of the actual use of AI in the healthcare system is being stymied quite a bit right now.
Anything to add, Lauren, Ethan?
Yeah, I obviously read and follow the international and national level developments on AI, but I live in a highly regulated industry, right, where my data is governed by HIPAA and my use of AI is governed by primarily FDA rules on clinical decision support. So I focus and the incorporation of AI into medical devices. So I really focus on, those guidances, those rules. FDA, had a couple of guidances out for comment, so I'm like, when I'm thinking about what's going to affect my product development day to day, that's really where I'm looking. And like Dan and Abeba said, when it trickles down to changes at that level, I think you can assess the impact on product development, but not really when it's the, national or global pronouncements.
One of the things that we're going to see is state and local, state primarily and international players jumping in with regulatory frameworks. We're already seeing that. So that could make things very complicated for global companies in particular.
Yeah, well, let me ask a question. What are the implications for global companies dealing with the various rules around the world? And a few related questions. Does the Trump administration approach increase or reduce the risk for industry? And will there, in fact, be a level playing field for AI development and adoption? Let me just turn to any member of the panel who wants to take on that series of questions.
I think it's I would say from an AI perspective, maybe you extrapolate even broader out to, look, my clients have been building, global supply chains and in integrating, different parts of their businesses over the better part of a couple of decades. And, whether it's AI, whether it's other changes that are happening globally, I think many are just trying to figure out how they're going to evolve their business, how they're going to manage, continually at a global level, but also what the implications are at a regional and local level. Things like, back to, the point that was raised earlier around most of the activity being in drug development and discovery. What are some of the issues and challenges around sort of the cross-border transmission of data that's generated as part of AI? If sites are identified in locations outside of the U.S., who owns that data that's either generated as part of the trial or is generative on top of the AI activity that is being done there? How does that data transmit? What are the protocols that need to be put in place? I mean, our clients are swimming in those types of questions, in addition to just all of the challenges that they're trying to manage in terms of thinking about how tariffs will impact their global supply chains. So it is a complex time.
Yeah. And Wayne, I think that's part of the governance, question that we were discussing earlier, is that you have to have a governance framework that is constantly renewing their understanding of the frameworks that they're dealing with around the world and adapting what they're doing to that, or challenging some of these requirements that are popping up around the world. One of the problems right now is it is often hard to see the AI benefit early on. And so, this is a long game. The technology is developing very rapidly, but it's a longer game that's still in the early days.
Yeah, no question about the long game. Lauren, I don't know whether you have anything to add to what Ethan and Dan just said, or Abeba.
Well, I think, as we're talking about a lot of different policy issues, I do, hope that this administration keeps an eye on reimbursement for AI, because it's, not something that fits easily into many of the existing buckets and categories. And, I think that that's a place where there could be real leadership on policy development.
And I'll just add that I think right now there's some uncertainty about what's going to happen with FDA's harmonization-related efforts, specifically with AI and med devices. The agency historically has collaborated with regulatory authorities from other countries in issuing AI-related policies. To give an example, in 2021, FDA, Health Canada, and the MHRA in the UK had jointly issued good machine learning principles for devices that employ AI. So if the agency is now taking a less active role in some of those harmonization efforts, I think there are real questions about what happens with those types of policies going forward.
Thanks, Abeba. We're going to take a quick break right now, but don't go anywhere because we will be right back. And you certainly don't want to miss our fascinating discussion, because we'll be talking more about FDA AI policy and several hot button issues.
And we're back. We're talking to Dan Kracov and Abeba Habtemariam from Arnold Porter, Ethan Dabbs from the Boston Consulting Group, and Lauren Silvis from Tempus about AI. So let's go to the FDA question, as Shelly raised before our break. Let's talk about where FDA stands on AI right now. Let me get granular. To what extent will FDA, do you think, be hampered in developing policy in this area, given the personnel cuts that we're seeing and given the likely budget cuts? And what are the potential ramifications? For example, what do you see happening to the Digital Health Center of Excellence in this administration? I'm going to start with Lauren on that because you're most recently at FDA.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's hard to keep pace with the spate of announcements and changes and reorganization announcements, and know how what's real and when things are actually going to happen. So I can tell you like what I look for, right? Like we bring products through FDA. They are advanced technologies. We have SAMD we've brought through and gotten cleared. We have spent a lot of time with our reviewers sort of talking through our technology, how we've developed these algorithms, what our data sources are, what our plans are for validation and verification. It's tremendous back and forth with our internal experts. We have physicians who have physician-to-physician conversations. It's important to preserve that aspect of FDA in order to continue to see products benefit patients. I mean, we spend a lot of time with our review teams in the back and forth, so they can understand our submission, so we can make changes according to their concerns. And so, that's a robust process that relies on FDA having the right expertise. So that's critically important. And I can say, as I was the Deputy Center Director for Policy, we spent a lot of time on trying to issue forward-thinking guidances, be responsive to the concerns we were hearing. So again, we hope to see good policy development coming out of FDA on these issues. And how they're going to do that with all of these different changes, I'm not sure, but those are the things that I look for when I think about our ability to continue to bring forward advanced products.
Yeah, we're certainly dealing with something of a moving target here at the agency. Dan, you're on top of FDA every day. I know that.
Yeah, I mean, it's my understanding they brought the digital health folks that were riffed back, or at least some of them. But I do understand that the Digital Health Center of Excellence is being moved into a new office that is the Strategy and Innovation Office at the agency, that's been reported. It's a very chaotic time right now, and it's hard to know when things will settle down. I do expect, as Lauren does, that we'll get to a place where they'll start making policy again. But the administration is going to be hampered in certain ways in terms of the ability to put out policy in a public way because of their deregulatory initiatives. So when you put out a new rule or new guidance, that you got to get rid of rules and guidance documents. So it's they'll develop other mechanisms for guiding industry, but it is hard to conceptualize how FDA is going to function as it has in the past in all areas, going forward. So we're still finding our way given the state of FDA right now after these moves.
Yeah. Do you agree that I think the initial announcements about the cutbacks at FDA indicated that the Digital Health Center of Excellence would remain. I don't know which employees will remain there, but it certainly will stand up. Do you take that as a signal that this administration will support AI and support digital health fairly aggressively?
I do think they're going to support it, but you have to have resources to do that as well. And I think that's going to be a big issue because when all this fancy work around AI starts flowing into the agency and applications, they're going to need to be able to do the review process of that, and that's costly, and it's requires a lot of training and expertise, and I am worried about that going forward.
Right. We'll just have to see how it evolves. I'm going to move on to another FDA question. And, as you know, former Commissioner Gottlieb recently criticized FDA's policies relating to clinical decision support software as too restrictive and hampering adoption of useful tools, including in electronic health record systems. What are your thoughts about that area? What do you expect to happen along the lines that he suggests? Again, let me turn to the panel to respond to that.
I think he raises a really good point about the integration of these tools into electronic health records. That's where the data are. These tools can really help physicians manage patients. Can surface information that may get lost in there. Can quickly sort through lots of data and figure out if something is being missed and or just make recommendations for physicians just to consider in the course of their own professional judgment and treatment. And the way the guidance is written there is a real risk of overregulation in a way that could hamper innovation and advancing patient care. And so, no idea what the agency is going to do about it, but I think it's a stop and think moment to how can we make sure that this doesn't go too far in terms of allowing more access to these tools that could really benefit and improve patient care.
Yeah, I would just say it's a real balance because as you were mentioning earlier, Wayne, there's fraud and abuse laws that apply in terms of the industry's nexus with physicians and patients, and the government is very nervous at times when companies are getting involved in any tool, much less AI tools, in electronic health records. That's both because of the potential that industry may be providing more than minimal support to the physicians, and two, that they might be affecting the clinical judgment. So it's a real dance that companies are engaging in right now in terms of the role of industry in relation to electronic health records, whether it's advertising, et cetera. And there have been several cases already focusing on clinical decision support, and there's a real potential for enforcement in that area and liability. So companies are treading very carefully. But I agree with Scott and with Lauren's reaction that some liberalization really makes a lot of sense here.
Abeba, you wanted to comment on that?
I was just going to add, in terms of Gottlieb's comments about the CDS guidance and EMR tools, what he said actually echoes what I think many companies in industry have said about FDA CDS guidance policies. And part of the issue is that FDA changed its interpretation of the Cures Act non-device CDS exemption over time. In guidances that were issued in 2017 and 2019, FDA had expressed a more expansive view of CDS functions that could potentially be considered a non-device CDS. But then in a final guidance issued in 2022, FDA took a far more narrow view. And I think one of the challenges with respect to embedding CDS and EMRs specifically is that a lot of times the EMRs are looking at many different parameters to generate an output about whether or not a patient potentially is showing signs of a specific disease or a condition. And under FDA's interpretation, if you're pointing to a specific disease or condition that takes you outside the scope of the non-device definition under the Cures Act, you would need to point to multiple different diseases or conditions for an HCP to consider in order to fall within the scope of the exemption. So that's been one of the challenges of attempting to get a CDS tool in an EMR system to fall within the non-device definition of a CDS.
Ethan, I don't know whether you want to add anything to this discussion.
Yes, I'm happy to add. Dan, I hear your point on the fraud and abuse considerations. I see most of our clients being relatively conservative, experimenting, watching, waiting, largely internally focused, but ready and poised to move as soon as there is clarity. It was mentioned before that this is a long game, but again, most of our clients are looking for sources of competitive advantage, and there are many that are watching, waiting, experimenting, but ready to move quickly as soon as there is clarity.
Yeah, how do we sort all that out? How do we get clarity? What's the I'm not talking about what the clarity is, but what is the process for getting there?
Well, we're just getting people in place at the agency. The IG has also been shaken up. DOJ. So it's a very volatile environment right now. I suspect that a lot of things will settle down over the next few months. That people are starting to think about things like user fees and so forth as policy making vehicles. User fee legislation So I think there'll be a lot of policy engagement over the next year in this area to try to create a liberalized framework, frankly, that companies can operate under, because right now it is extraordinarily difficult in certain areas.
Thanks, Dan. Let's move to some other hot button issues, and let's begin with intellectual property. There are a lot of questions on the legal implications of AI generated content, including IP protection and ethical and practical considerations. To what extent is this a concern? Dan, do you want to kick that off?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest issues, that I hear from clients is, what's an invention here, and who's the inventor? Because it can't be the AI itself, and so companies are kind of watching and waiting as IP policy in this area and the case law develops. But I think that is a very big concern. And what at the end of the day do they own? And also their rights and data can get very, very complicated as well. So, this isn't, IP is something that's going to be, that and privacy are sort of fundamental issues that are sort of infused throughout the world of AI, and are something that's just a constant that you need to consider if you're using it, to advance your business. And in our area, it's even more important given how critical IP is.
Well, let's address the privacy issue in greater depth. Ethan, how do you view that privacy issue and the whole issue of cybersecurity and the like?
I think it's an issue of great concern. And, again, as companies have access to a whole range of data, I think they're all of my clients are monitoring very closely, how legislation is evolving, not only the U.S. but outside, because again, you're trying to knit together data sets from all over the world in terms of drug development and discovery, and so I think that there's there's a significant set of challenges there that everybody is spending a lot of time focused on.
Yeah, it's an interesting, it'll be interesting for me, at least, I think, to see how this develops, because, we are a clinical laboratory. And since I walked in the door before all of this AI, explosion and discussion and podcasts about it, I would have said HIPAA and cybersecurity were, our biggest issues, total focus. We license records for research. And so, certainly as part of AI development, those issues are of prime importance, but they have always been when you're dealing in healthcare data as part of your day-to-day care of patients and research efforts.
Thanks, everyone. What are the most important things that companies can do when evaluating and integrating AI into their development efforts and processes, from discovery through clinical trials? Ethan, do you want to take that first?
I think it goes back to one of the places we were before, making sure that there's appropriate governance and responsible AI policies in place, and that they're well understood, and people are within the organization are well educated. I think everybody has the best of intentions, but this is complex, uncharted territory, and so the more companies can do internally to educate their people in every function, from executives on down to the front line, is going to be of paramount importance here.
I would agree. It's, there is so much potential for liability here if you get it wrong. And I don't think that's fully internalized by some of the people who are looking at these tools. So to me, it's about risk assessment and mitigation plans for the adoption of AI, and not discounting down, liability that could emerge 10 years from now. That's the history of the industry, is we do something now, and then 10 years later, we're dealing with, False Claims Act cases and other things like that. Now is the time to kind of really look forward and think about, what are the controls we need to have in place.
I'd add to that, I certainly agree with all that, but I'd also add, as you're thinking about incorporating AI, and if you're in particular not developing it yourself, like understanding the quality limitations, range of the data that the AI is trained on, How were the AI generated? What limitations, what are you looking at in developing this AI, and how is it generated? I think can really help folks who are not, developing it themselves be more successful in their incorporation and partnerships, and use of it in drug and device development.
Lauren, I'd add to that. I think it's important again, just to use common sense. I mean, I know that sounds basic, but just as any of us receive synthesis of information from teams, from other people that we work with, we take the basic steps to sense check. Does it make sense? Are the outputs that we're getting logical and sensical in what we understand and know? I think we need to continue to encourage people, and I see my clients thinking about how do they continue to educate people to poke, probe, challenge, understand, where the source data came from, how were the insights generated through AI, to be able to sense check, are the results what we would expect, and what sort of risks are we facing, as a result of those.
Thanks, everyone. And on that note, Wayne, it's time to thank Arnold and Porter, our terrific collaborator on the series, and our guests for part one of the series, Dan, Abeba, Ethan, and Lauren, for being incredible guests. We'd also like to thank our podcast creator and executive producer, Michael Levin Epstein, and our assistant producer, Sam Hoffmeister.
Yeah, and I also want to add my thanks to the guests. This has been a really stimulating discussion. It's clear that there will be a lot more to come on AI and a lot more to come in terms of our series. Just to remind everybody, if you want to find out more about our podcast, visit our website, fdawatch.net. I'll repeat that, fdawatch.net. And we know you won't want to miss parts 2 and 3 of the series or any episode of FDA Watch. The only way to guarantee that is to subscribe to the podcast. It's free. It's available on all your podcast platforms and on our website, which I'll repeat, fdawatch.net. Our podcast is growing exponentially, and that's because so many of you have chosen to be subscribers. Subscribers find out about the upcoming podcast sooner and get episodes in their podcast feed automatically.
Thanks, Wayne. And as we say at the end of every episode of FDA Watch, if you really want to watch what FDA is doing, listen to FDA Watch.